It's a huge deal. It will bring stability. It will bring predictability. That's very important for our businesses on both sides of the Atlantic.
Well, folks, here's some news that's got everyone buzzing. President Donald Trump and EU leader Ursula von der Leyen have just inked a trade agreement that's pulling the two sides back from the brink of a full-blown economic clash. The US and Europe dodge a trade showdown with this 15% tariff setup. Trump calls it the grandest bargain in history as they outline the basics of a new trade setup. We're talking a whopping $1.3 trillion in pacts that the president has hammered out with the EU, Japan, and the UK all in a mere 3 weeks. But there's one holdout, America's top trade buddy, Canada. While Brussels folded into a 15% tariff arrangement in return for $750 billion in American energy buys and $600 billion in investment promises, Ottawa just said no thanks and walked right out. No handshake, no big announcement. And now Trump's firing warnings about slapping a 35% tariff on Canadian goods come August 1. But get this, no one saw it coming. Rather than hustling to cut a deal like the Europeans did, Canada's dragging its feet deliberately. Word from insiders is that Prime Minister Mark Carney isn't dodging the heat. He's skipping the whole pressure cooker and going for a smarter, slower burn. Out of the spotlight, Canadian teams are ramping up their Arctic pushes, and folks in the know are eyeing how Ottawa's forging fresh shipping ties and energy paths that could weather Trump's time in office and loosen America's hold on key routes. This goes beyond a simple impasse. It's a real face-off between Trump's high-stakes deal-making with threats and Canada's tough, homegrown staying power. So, why is Carney rolling the dice when the EU blinked? And what's really brewing up in the Arctic shadows, away from the headlines and the trade sticks? Let's unpack it all, jumping right into the thick of things. Let's zero in on this dust-up, Trump's famous 15% outline and how Carney's flat-out no has turned the tables. So, what really happened? Back on July 27, 2025, at Turnberry, Trump nailed down an accord with the EU. He pulled back from the 30% tariff he'd been brandishing like a club and dialed it to 15%. But don't kid yourself, that's still a gut punch. This 15% now sticks to roughly 70% of all the stuff Europe sends our way. For perspective, pre-June 2025, the going rate on those imports was a measly 2.5%. So, it's no 30, but it's a huge jump, and Europe sure felt the sting. In that agreement, Brussels committed to beefing up energy links and boosting big-time buys from the US, zeroing in on areas like fuels, tech gear, and defense kit. These steps, they're pretty much aimed at cozying up politically in DC. That enormous cash figure locked in the whole pivot. Europe's bosses signed off on those hefty promises to dodge even tougher hits. It's straight out of Trump's handbook. Dangle massive trade, wax as a bargaining chip, then hand over a milder version bundled with blockbuster contracts. He pulled the same with Japan, the UK, and Vietnam. But that's where Carney throws a wrench in. While the EU gave ground, his crew held the line. He wouldn't get snared in the same web. His play? Dodge Trump's setup by nixing the big pledges that had locked Canada into a needy spot. With that straight-up rejection, the US dealmakers, who are used to folks buckling, were caught off guard. Canada zipped past the whole structure, unwilling to swap its control over supplies for a quick tariff breather. That's why the Americans now view Carney not just as a peer, but as a sharper operator. The fallout's serious. DC's go-to tactic of tariff jitters might lose its edge if more partners copy Canada. Should Carney's rock-solid approach catch on as the way to go, the US could run short on sweeteners to offer. What seemed like strong-arm leverage might fizzle into hot air. Bottom line, Carney turned down Trump's 15% blueprint. The EU grabbed the billions and ran. Canada passed. The US is rattled. And that's your lead story. Shifting from that blueprint chat, let's zoom in on Canada's gutsy turn. Hit with new squeezes from Washington that same month, Canada planted its feet and shot down any snap pact. Around mid-July, the feds pushed back hard, saying talks were rocky and Ottawa would only go for something balanced and solid, not one forced by fake deadlines. Rather than scrambling to fall in line, Canada opted to hit pause on any quick sign-off. The PM stressed smart restraint, noting that hasty moves hurt the bigger picture. At the same time, every province linked arms for a unified front. Come mid-March, Canada teamed up tight with the regions to flag the industries most at risk. That teamwork sparked a home-focused fix to lock down supply lines without leaning on US goods. They cleared out internal hurdles to trade by July 1. a shift expected to slash inside costs by as much as 15% and lift overall output by 4 to 8%. Quietly, spots like Alberta, Ontario, and BC drew up backup schemes. They zeroed in on autos, metals like steel and aluminum, and timber as the hot zones. The plan was straightforward: fortify homegrown chains instead of bending to US wishes. This stance shows a clever pullback from Trump's mix of threats and deal bait. Canada skipped the tariff tightrope altogether. No massive energy grabs or investment vows to ease the bite. They ramped up self-reliance and supply safeguards. The risks are legit. If those 35% duties land on prime areas, the shocks will echo clear across the continent. Carney's no isn't mere pushback. It's a wager on independence, pieced together from the inside out. Layering on the rising friction in the talk, Trump's off-the-cuff words gave Canada a surprise edge in the press game. In a quip around July 25, 2025, the president owned up, saying, "We haven't zeroed in on a trade thing with Canada," and added, "It's not much of a back and forth." He even floated that Canada could just eat the tariffs without a deal. But inside the US squad, staffers kept calling the chats positive, a total mismatch. That split seeped out to the media and watchers, chipping away at Washington's stance and trust. Canada pounced on the disconnect. Ottawa painted the exchange as lopsided. If things fall apart, they say, it's on the US side, not theirs. Carney's group ran with it. Right after Trump's lines, Canadian voices underlined their steady push for even talks. They pointed to DC's jumbled signals as the true snag. That messaging hit home big time. Takes from spots like The Guardian and Washington Post broke down how the White House's flip-flops sapped US pull and cast Canada as the level-headed one on the world stage. By late July, the loonie dipped about 15%, tied partly to dimming deal vibes, but Ottawa spun it to amp up their cool-headed image. That narrative flip handed Canada the spotlight. It framed them not as the stubborn holdout against duties, but as the measured teammate asking for order and reliability from a fractured US crew. In a nutshell, Trump's slip-ups in the spotlight accidentally rewrote the story. It gifted Canada the ethical upper hand and dulled the sting of his 35% tariff shadow, a textbook slip in the global comms arena. Weaving it all in, let's look at how Canada spun the tariff tussle into an Arctic edge. Mid-March 2025 p.m. Carney rolled out a massive blueprint via Bill C-5 to amp up Canada's northern footprint. The bill sped along big builds and funneled more than 6 billion Canadian bucks into Arctic builds and self-rule efforts like the fresh over-the-horizon radar tie-up with Australia. By late June, it got the green light, and regions kicked off shared pushes for harbors, highways, and local energy setups. Ottawa named its debut Inuit envoy and set up outposts in Greenland and Anchorage to amp Indigenous outreach and northern links. Instead of scrambling after DC's tariff handshakes, Canada poured into tangible wins. The Arctic's packed with key stashes of lithium, cobalt, and rare earths, crucial for security and green innovations. The US, meanwhile, leans hard on China, pulling in about 70% of its rare earth needs, including the tough ones for heat-resistant magnets and gear for the troops. By grabbing the reins on those chains and builds, Ottawa nudged US vulnerabilities without a direct swing, giving Canada sway in mineral trades and talks worldwide. Carney's spend also tweaked how folks see things. No more looking like they're just hunkering down from US squeezes. Canada came off as forward-thinking bosses with a solid roadmap. This northern drive made Trump's tariff jab a global goof. While DC yapped about pacts, Canada laid tracks, both literal and in policy, that beefed up their independence. The whirlwind of Trump's trade battles cracked to Canada's steady Arctic vibe. It wasn't plain old pushback. It was a slick, planned pushback, using home strengths, native ties, and resource smarts as the fresh battleground in continent-wide trade fights. After that Arctic angle, Canada leaned harder into a drawn-out stance over a panic patch. Early April 2025, as Trump gunned for fast trade shifts, Canada ramped up its home front builds on the down low. Ottawa pledged over $30.9 billion Canadian dollars over 4 years to shore up self-rule, kickstart home factories, and guard local chains. No chasing a speedy tariff unwind like the EU or Japan. Canada set out to redraw the lines. Through Bill C-5, the One Canadian Economy Act that cleared in late June, they knocked down walls between provinces and hurried national project nods. That gave a backbone, not frenzy, letting regions and native groups steer their own builds. What made Canada stand out was the smarts, not the knee-jerk. Where Trump hawked quick wins, Canada stacked defenses. Where Washington swung export blocks and war talk, Ottawa toughened its lines by ditching outside needs and growing inside output. All the while, Canada synced with grassroots players, native groups, and provinces to shield core fields. Autos, woods, and vital minerals got the focus. They dodged knee-jerk pledges to skirt duties. Instead, they held out for deals that fit right. This kept Canada tough against pushes but open to smart plays. If DC backs off and floats a clean, open pact, Ottawa's game, but on equal footing, no arm twist. Really, Ottawa flipped Trump's flash in the pan, spotlight chasing threatened deal style into a lopsided match. Their far-sighted builds and factory push via Bill C-5 didn't just weather the storm, it let Canada pen its own trade tale. So, Carney's hold-off on a fast framework wasn't solo stubbornness. It was a top-down, roots-up redo of how North American trade rolls. When Trump swung the 35% tariff club, he figured Canada would buckle, but nope. What caught him was the hush, not the hustle or the backpedal, just a cool, plotted breather. While the EU dashed in with trillion-scale giveaways, Canada grabbed a whole other manual, stall the pact, lock down the base, and stealthily stack clout in the Arctic. Carney didn't ink under the gun. He reset the rules on his watch and his patch. Now, sans a deal, and with the duty timer humming, it's plain. The upper hand ain't in DC anymore. It's up in Ottawa. So, what's the next move? Will Canada's steady weight drag the US to real bargaining? Or does Trump crank the fire and shove Canada to a frantic fold? And that Arctic ace could mastery of those northern rarities tip the scales in North American sway? This ain't solely trade talk now. It's who runs the show when the rules shift. What's your call? Should Canada stick to waiting for the perfect fit or lock it in quick to dodge worse hits?